Bill called up one day and he said, what do you think about going racing again? And I said, racing what? And he says, well, the Miss U.S. And I said, well, Doobie and those guys are running the boat. He said, yeah, but George called up and asked if I'd be interested in driving the boat. And he said, if I'm going to drive the boat, I want you to crew chief it for me. We went to Tampa and we ran there. That was with the magnesium boat. It ran pretty good the first couple heats. And the final heat, he got out in front and he was going like blazing saddles. Everything was wonderful. And then he just started getting slower and slower and slower and slower. And finally he lost count of the laps that he'd run, and he ran an extra lap. And he came in and he was exhausted from fighting the boat. And I said, wow, what happened? And he said, oh, this thing. He says, I don't know, something's wrong with it. He said, it was going well, and he said, then it just got to where you couldn't handle it. And he said, you had to be really, really careful going into the corner with it. He says, it's like it wanted to hook and spin. And he said, it's terrible. He said, I thought maybe we could win here. He said, but I couldn't do anything with the boat. We just couldn't do anything. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, you did win. Well, I couldn't have. I said, well, you did. I said, because everybody else that could have beat you, they all crapped out. So you end up being the winner. I don't believe it. I said, there's the guy sitting in the Jeep. Let's get in it. He wants to take you down there and get the trophy. Well, let's go, he said. So we in the Jeep and off down to this place. And we came back, and there sat the boat. So we got the slings on it. We started to lift it up. As it came up, the sponson bottom started just sagging down, the runners and everything, huh? And the sponson bottoms had come completely loose from the frame, with the exception of the first three frames up in the front end, and there they hung like a couple of half soles. And I said, well, there's a problem. That's why you can't get it into the corner and get it through. And he said, well, this thing's just coming apart. He said, we got to take it someplace. You take it home? I said, well, we're going to miss the whole rest of the Eastern Circuit if we go home. I said, we should go to Les's. Oh, yeah, okay, great. Let's call and see if he'll let us come up there. If he will, let's go up there. So that's what we did. The guys went on to D.C.
Winning the 66 Suncoast Cup in Tampa, everyone's happy they won the race, but the boat was really, really damaged. They took the boat up to Les Stodiger's in Michigan to repair it, and they knew they'd have to miss the race in D.C. So Bill did not go to Washington, D.C., and he wasn't there to see the carnage. And that's a day that in many ways changed the face of our sport tremendously. For those of us of a generation, people talk about, where were you when Kennedy was assassinated? Or for our parents, where were you at Pearl Harbor? Or for our kids, where were you on 9/11? For those of us close to the sport, where were you at the President's Cup 1966?
was, well, emotionally, he was beat up real bad. Those guys were good friends of his, and they'd raced together for years and years. And I guess, you know, they'd had crashes and stuff, but, you know, not many guys lost their life in a crash. And then all of a sudden to have Ronnie, the thing broke in two, and that was the end of Ronnie and Ronnie Musson. And then the other guys, you know, I wasn't there, but the guys explained it to me. They said, well, they held the race back for several hours, and there was some conversation about canceling the event, and then some more conversation about we should go ahead and reschedule it. After all, it is the President's Cup and one thing and another. And so they did, as we all know. They went ahead and they ran the event, but some people that I were talking to back then, I never forget, they'd tell me, well, we should have just called the thing off, because the guys went out there and they're racing for old Ronnie and for glory, and he said they should have just stopped it then.
Bill always said that, you know, he didn't like to dwell on it, but there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't think about his friends that were killed. There were 3 in one day in Washington, D.C., and then the very next week, a race in Detroit, another driver was killed. But he always said that not a day would go by that he didn't think about those drivers. But it didn't make him fear the sport. He always said that he never did believe in luck. He only believed in God and preparation.
No, I think Bill was like most race drivers. You've already put into the mix that you might get killed and that other people are going to get killed, and you're hoping you're not one of them. So it's death and injury at that time. Now, the sport's changed because it's so much safer, all sports. When someone's killed now, it's a huge shock. Back then, we accepted that there's going to be deaths, and you just hoped it wasn't going to be you. So when a death did happen, you had already accepted it. You felt bad, you were going to miss the person, but you had already gone through that scenario. If you hadn't, you were probably pretty stupid, because if you hadn't looked at the downside of the sport, you shouldn't have been there. So Bill, like us all, knew that there was going to be deaths. He had seen it before, and he grieved. He felt bad, but he knew that at that time it was part of it.
And a good start as Smirnoff gets a good jump on Tahoe Miss at the very start, and there are almost 5 boats abreast. Saber's probe is on the outside.
Yeah, the boat's all repaired, and it was running pretty good. And and then he went into the bell isle turn down there, and he dumped the thing in a big hole, and he rolled the boat over, and he tore the cowlings all off of it, and bent the instrument panel, and he held such a death grip on the steering wheel that he bent it so bad that it could only turn about a quarter of a turn. And of course, in the pit area, we couldn't see exactly what was going on down in the far end down there, and there was a kind of a big splash, but the boat kept coming. But boy, it was doing some kind of weird thing, you know. It was way off the race course and then back on the race course and going kind of slow. And I said, wow, what's happening here? And then he came by the pit area, and all you could see was his helmet above the deck. He wasn't sitting up in the driver's seat in the cockpit like he would, but only his head. I thought, oh, geez, the seat must have broken, and he's having a hard time running the thing. Well, the seat did break, along with a whole bunch of other things. And he made it around, and he finished the event, and he pulled into the pier, but then he passed out. But he did manage to get the thing shut off, but missed the pier, and the guys jumped in the water and got a line on it. We pulled it back and pulled him out of the cockpit, and the medical people came there and took him up to the medical tent. And, what's his name? Chuck Thompson. Anyway, he came up there and he said, how's Bill? And I told him, oh, he's going to be okay. He just out of wind. And I said his shins got banged up when the thing went over, and he got stuffed into the instrument panel, but no broken bones. I told him, no broken bones. He's okay. he said, well, okay, great, I got to go. He says, I got to run the next heat. And he went and got in the Smirnoff, and it came apart on him at the starting line down there.
Tied in points, and it's an important heat.
Myra Slovak gets a good middle slot there, and right next to him is Chuck Thompson. Oh, Thompson dug it, and the boat has flown apart. The red flare goes out immediately. Tahoe Miss and Chuck Thompson were riding side by side, and all of a sudden, a tremendous sheet of water, and I see no sign of the boat whatsoever. Bill, do you?
So I have no idea how to explain exactly what happened. It looked to me like Smirnoff was moving up through the pack in close competition, of course, with the Tahoe Miss. They were all in good lanes. They all had good directional stability. Neither boat got out of attitude and just at the last, moving so very fast.
Well, here is a man who wears an unusually heavy burden at this hour, Lee Shaneth, who is the chairman of the Unlimited Racing Commission, but also the owner of the Smirnoff.
Well, Keith, we've gone along for so many years in this very high-speed, dangerous sport, and maybe we've just been plain lucky that there's been no disasters and tragedies. But now we have upon ourselves some serious accidents that have cost the lives of 4 of our best drivers and my best friends. And a committee has been formed, and a thorough investigation is going on right now, and we hope to come up with all the facts, the reasons, and explanations as soon as possible. And at the same time, we're going to lay out the future of unlimited boat racing. It is going on. I think it would be a disaster to ever stop this sport and let these 4 men's lives go to waste. They dedicated their lives to this sport. Ronnie Musson was vice chairman of the commission on the West Coast. Donnie Wilson was my southern commissioner. Chuck Thompson was the controller of the unlimited financial end of it. These men were the working men of this sport. Plus they were in it a long time, and they were the tops. And I think it would be a waste of their lives to ever think of doing anything but building racing up bigger and better than it is.
All right, let's get a comment from Bill Muncey here. Bill, you heard Lee's comments. I know you feel very deeply about what has happened.
Well, there's any question about it, Bill. What has happened to us in the past 2 weeks has been an incredible thing. It's just impossible to imagine. Certainly right now, as an organization and a competitive effort with the loss of 4 of the finest that'll ever hit the sport, we must operate from a position of strength, and I'm sure that's exactly what we'll do.
My mom wanted her husband to be safe. And on the other hand, here's this new opportunity with the Miss U.S. organization, George and Penny Simon, very capable, wonderful people. Very aggressive as far as being sportsmen, something that's sometimes lacking. And they gave him the opportunity to drive and be a manager and give him a steady paycheck. And so he finally, something he could hang his hat on, and things were looking up. And then that awful Sunday where you lost 3 drivers in one day. And that must just have scared the heck out of my mom. And my dad, I'll never forget it. He went into his bedroom and didn't come out for like 3 days. It was like the first time I remember my dad not being at a race. And apparently he said he had told George Simon, hey, sorry, but we're just not ready. And whether you want to argue there was some kind of cosmic premonition or whatever, he just wasn't there. And it was like, whoa, wake up call. And so, yeah, there was some very legitimate concern amongst my parents of what's the smart, prudent thing to do.
He was a great one for sizing things up, We'd take the boat outside and put it in the parking lot. Okay, fine, we'll do that. So we'd take it out and we'd put it in the parking lot. And he'd spend an hour out there holding his thumb up and looking at this and looking at that, this and that. And he'd come back and he'd say, okay, here's what we need to do. We need to change the shape of the nose of the cowling. Everybody has this cowling. It's a traditional cowling. Let's do something that maybe we can improve the airflow to the carburetor when we're doing it, but let's at least change it so it's different. So anyway, we had a little contest in the shop, and it was like, okay, guys, new cowling, shoot your best shot. What do you think would look nice? And so everybody drew some concoction up, and we all sat down and said, well, we like this. This is different. And what we came up with is what we came up with, and that's how it came to be. And it wasn't It wasn't a particularly aerodynamic or styling thing. It was just what's appealing to the eye and what'll get the job done and what's different. So.
It is considerably different. The inside is a lot different than some of the boats we've had. Jack Ramsey designed a construction technique that we think is pretty great. And then, of course, the tail section is a little removed from what people normally see on unlimited hydroplanes. It's still experimental as far as we're concerned. It'll be some time before we decide whether to keep it. I kind of like it myself. I think it makes the boat look kind of nasty and maybe pretty doggone competitive.
He didn't work on the boat. He came and he talked story, and not that he didn't work on the boat. He did do some things. He would get in the boat and he would sit in the boat, and he would say the seat's got to go back 1/4 of an inch, and the throttle's got to be tilted to the right just a little bit more, and I can't be standing on it with my tippy toe, so I guess we're going to have to move it back 1/2 an inch. Now the steering wheel needs to be flatter, and you'd go through all of these changes, and he'd come back in a couple days and he'd get in the boat and he'd say, well, that's better, but now we need to change the steering wheel another 1/2 an inch flatter, and that's too much tilt on the throttle because it twists my leg. You got to bring it back a little bit. And, yeah, he was helping. He was helping getting the boat set up so it was comfortable for him to drive, which was important, And we used to tease him unmercifully about, figure it out, dude. How do you want it? You want to lay down and drive, or what's the trip here?
We're on the official barge this afternoon. Here's the Miss U.S. now heading down the front straightaway with Bill Muncey at the helm, breaking in a new engine. Dave, I wonder if we could get you to tell us what's going on. Here he is cutting his run short.
Well, this is a new engine that we built up in the past couple weeks, and we try to put a little time on them in the water and run them around the lake somewhat to find out how they're going to perform before we put them into competition. It's very nice to be able to rely on Bill, because Bill has had such many years of experience, and he himself can pick these things out and oftentimes very accurately pinpoint them, so it's a less difficult job for us on the crew to sort out the problems when he brings the boat back. When he's out in the boat, he's the captain, and he knows what's going on, and I sure can't tell.
It's all very democratic, huh?
No, you can't tell him what to do. I mean, he's there and he knows what's going on. There's just no way that you can tell him what's happening. He's sitting in the boat.
And here we are back to the head end of the race with the Miss U.S. going to be the victor if he'll hold out for another 1,000 feet.
Well, we won world championship 2 times
And
with
here
it.
he comes.
But it was, again, you're fighting Shoemaker and the new Bardall, and those guys were running. They were running good. And it wasn't that we couldn't run with them. Oftentimes it wasn't that we weren't faster than them. We couldn't run long enough to beat them. We'd have boost pump failures. We'd have old hose failures. We'd have this failure and that failure. And part of the problem was we're having a hard time getting equipment.
Billy Shoemaker, a Seattle boy, has been doing tremendously well and has to be classified in the 1967 Gold Cup as the guy to beat with the success that he's had thus far this year. Bill, it's just great to have you in a first-class boat with a first-class team. I'd like to sit here and maybe, I'm sure you won't tell me, but maybe give me some reason why you think or why your boat is performing as good as it is, considering the fact that it is a brand new boat this year.
We've been supplied with the finest of equipment from Mr. Bardall, and we have a very young but very expert crew.
They've got tremendous enthusiasm, I can say that, and they approach this, they approach the whole sport with a certain optimism that is difficult to compete with. Bill, you've been on 2.5-mile courses throughout the country. Detroit was the first 3-mile course we had.
I don't know if we were ever really evenly matched in equipment. It seems like the years that I had a real good boat, his wasn't quite as good. Meaning when I was driving Bardall and he was driving Miss U.S. When I drove the Parco, it was completely ridiculous. He was much faster and better. Then when I drove the Pay'n Pak, we had similar boats then. I don't think Bill's attitude adjusted very much. He had a pretty good boat, so he was in a happier, better mood. And he would. This was the year that he was telling me that his boat wasn't running well at all, and wound up just creaming me in the first race on account of that, because I had believed that we definitely had this more superior boat. Didn't turn out that way. But I all I can really say is that I enjoyed my racing career against Bill, whether he was in a slower boat or a faster boat. And when we were really racing head to head, and that happened a few times, it was also enjoyable because I knew I was racing against the best there was. He was my, I thought, that I only wanted to grow up to be as good as Bill Muncey in a hydroplane, and I don't think I ever achieved that, but he helped make me what I was in unlimited racing.
A lot of people watching the Bardol and Bill Shoemaker as he takes certainly the boat to beat into the 1967 Gold Cup exclusively on King.
Welcome to the Great Pacific Northwest, Lake Washington in Seattle, and the 1967 Gold Cup race. 12 of the fastest unlimited hydroplanes in the world running in the Grand Prix. 60 miles of racing for the biggest prize in boat racing, the Gold Cup. And a man working with us today on ABC's Wide World of Sports is Bill Muncey, a man who has won the Gold Cup 4 times, and today we'll be looking for number 5. And Bill, there's some pretty tough customers out there.
Keith, this without question represents, I think, the strongest field we've ever built for Gold Cup competition. Most of the boats, the stronger boats, came in around 110 to 112 mile an hour. We had some laps around 118 around this 3-mile course, and I'm inclined to think we're going to see world record-breaking Gold Cup heats all day today.
Myra Slovak, Jack Regis, some of the old original lead butts are still charging after you. It should be quite exciting, Bill.
But we've got some young guys with new equipment that are ready to charge and make honest men out of those of us who've had maybe a little more experience. So it's certainly going to be an exciting event all day long.
And before the race starts, there's always a great deal of strategy when that 1-minute white flag goes up.
You got to know your field, Keith, and in this warm-up, right here, coming off this exit pen, heading to the starting line, you pick a lane that you think can do the best job for you strategically. You know the limitations of the other boats, the other drivers, and you certainly know what your boat will do. So you find one where you can go with all this water and speeds of 150 mile an hour.
That big pie-face clock indicates it is now time to go. And here comes the Notre Dame, the white boat, and coming from the outside, Miss Lapeer, the blue and white boat with Warner Gardner. So it's a battle between Lapeer and Notre Dame as they hit the starting line for Heat 1A. And Notre Dame running inside should assume the lead in Heat 1A as they go into the south turn. Jack Regis driving the Notre Dame right there in the center of your picture, and that's the Lapeer with Warner Gardner coming up on the outside. And the Notre Dame bouncing, and it's exploded. The Notre Dame has exploded as going into the south turn. The Notre Dame has come apart, and Harris Club hits the Notre Dame, flies into the air. And we've got 2 boats, at least 2 boats involved in a major wreck going into the south turn of the Gold Cup course. The red flares are out. The Notre Dame, as you see there, is sinking. So we, I think, have lost 2 boats right here at the beginning of Heat 1A. The helicopter manned by the Coast Guard, 13th District, right on the scene. These people do an incredible job of rescue work all through the Puget Sound country. And they are right here. It looks like a skin diver has one of the drivers right now. That would be Jack Regis, a tender boat out there with another skin diver, and this fellow should be picking up Chuck Hickling. So we'll have to wait a moment to find out about the condition of the 2 drivers. Well, here we are at the final moments of the 1967 Gold Cup race. Miss U.S. with Bill Muncey leading in this final heat. And Bill is battling here, trying to win this heat and move up to 3rd place overall in the standings. And he has driven a very fast final heat. Started out at 106 plus, and he's kept his speed up in excess of 104 miles an hour, and the going has been pretty rough. So he's trying to win the heat and move up in the overall standings, but the fellow who sits at the very top of the standings right now as we go into the final lap is this young man, 24-year-old Bill Shoemaker, driving Ole Bardol's Miss Bardol. And he has just a few hundred feet left to go, and he can claim his 1st Gold Cup and the 4th for Ole Bardol. Here it comes. Miss U.S. Bill Muncey, flying up through the straightaway and into the turn. And Bill Muncey will come off the turn, get the checkered flag from Howie Richmond. He'll win the heat. But the 1967 Gold Cup champion, the Miss Bardol.
Before we leave Lake Washington, let's talk to the man who's been working with us and the man who won the final heat, Bill Muncey. Congratulations on that win, Bill.
Well, it came a little late in the day, and there wasn't enough of it, I don't think, Keith. I'm mighty pleased, though, with Billy Shoemaker. I just think he did a remarkable job. I think he's the brightest star on the unlimited horizon, and he's going to be a tough nut to crack. He's a young guy, and he's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of cockpit experience, and he's a thinker. And I just don't know, honestly, who's going to beat him.
Well, there's a few old war horses like you still around. Bill, it was a great pleasure working with you again.
Oh, Keith, it's great to do the Wide World of Sports show, and I certainly hope that maybe in some way we've contributed to the public's fun of enjoying Gold Cup 1967.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Muncey. And now this is Keith Jackson from the Gold Cup race on Lake Washington in Seattle.
I would say that Bill Muncey was comfortable in front of the camera being interviewed, and I think that kind of came from being a band leader, because you're constantly on stage, and being a public speaker, because he was a great public speaker. You know, he'd go on tour for Atlas Van Lines, and he would show the film of him, you know, blowing up in Madison and all of that stuff, and sinking the Coast Guard boat here. And then he would talk about it, and he was a good speaker. And I think all of that came from when he'd be in front of a band, because a good band leader talks to the public and communicates with the public, and he did that. And I think that all tied in together when he'd be interviewed for any situation. And also being an announcer for ABC Wide World of Sports, I'll tell you, you know, you have to have your act together to be able to be picked for that, and that's why he was there.
At the wheel of that brilliant red boat, Miss U.S., is Bill Muncey of Seattle, Washington, one of the most famous names in the history of powerboating. Going into this final race and the most prestigious race of the year, the Gold Cup, Muncey is one of 3 men who still has a chance for the yearly Drivers' Championship. That's a most unusual circumstance. Usually the championship for the year is all wrapped up by this point. But he is in second place, behind Dean Chenoweth, and just behind him is Bill Sterrett. Whoever wins the Gold Cup today most certainly will win the Drivers' Championship.
He was a showman, and I think he was maybe more of a showman than anything else. I mean, he loved performing in front of people and to turn them on, you know, whatever it was, if it's the music, the sport, just anything he was doing. So I imagine that that's why he was asked to have his own radio show, television show, and later on he did Wide World of Sports, just because he was so articulate. You couldn't help but get excited about anything he was talking about. He was just he had such enthusiasm. Jim McKay of Wide World of Sports, ABC, once said that Bill Muncey is the most articulate man in all of sports in America today.
Well, one heat remains in the 1969 Gold Cup race here in San Diego. Unfortunately, Miss U.S., piloted by our friend Bill Muncey, will not be in the final heat, but in a way, that's our good fortune. I hate him to call it that, Bill, but we will have your services as commentator for this final heat. The way we see it, point-wise, all that Bill Sterrett and Miss Budweiser has to do to win the Gold Cup is to finish the race. It looks like a race for second place then between Jim McCormick in Atlas and Tommy Tucker Fultz in Miss Pay'n Pak.
True, the Budweiser has to only finish or conclude the heat. That's all he has to do to win the Gold Cup. But Bill Sterrett, to win the National Drivers' Championship, has to run third, or he's going to lose. Bill Sterrett is, in my opinion, is the toughest chauffeur that I've ever run against. And he really doesn't have to take too many chances to win, because from experience he's going to drive well. And I know this. I have great confidence in his ability. You have to give Leif a great deal of credit. In my opinion, they're probably the fastest boat in the race today. Well, of course, Dean he's just, to me, an exciting, stimulating, excellent driver who has had great experience. He's from Ohio. Great experience in all kinds of boat racing. He makes all the right moves. He's not particularly emotional about it, and he's clean, and he's tough. And I have great respect for him. He's a brilliant young man. In our society, you know, men aren't allowed to come up and let another man know how they feel about it. And maybe you may have strong feelings about a male that, gee, I like this guy, he's a great guy, and he has so many qualities that I admire. But all you have to do in a situation like this is just look at the other fellow's eyes, and you know that he has great confidence in your ability. My crew thinks I'm the finest chauffeur in the whole world. They just don't, there isn't anybody better. I gotta go.
Bill Muncey, as a man, I would say was probably the most moral, most clean-cut person I've ever met in my life. He never drank. People used to say, oh, I saw Bill Muncey. Bull. He never took a drink, ever. He drank more Gatorade and more coffee than anybody else, and his only vice was L&M cigarettes, and he smoked a lot. And in those days, you know, it wasn't, they were just coming out with the reports. And that was his big vice. I mean, he was the most remarkable person I think I've ever known and ever met.
Both of them were reaching their 40s, and a lot of people would take stock. And I think at that point, my mom wanted my dad to back off and stop racing boats, and my dad knew that that was pretty much the one thing he knew for sure, that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's what he could do well, and that if there was a future there, that's where he could invest himself best. And also, not to mention the fact that my brother Dorian and I were reaching our teens, and that's always a delightful time to be a parent raising teenagers. And so it was a tumultuous period in all of our lives. And at some point, my parents decided to divorce. And it must have been, I know it was very tough. I remember talking with Dad about it, and it was like, when it came to marriage, he was a pretty much meat and potatoes kind of guy. You went to work every day, you treated your wife with reverence. He wasn't in that respect, he wasn't a really complicated individual. He was a very morally centered guy. Being divorced was like, although strangely enough, my grandfather Muncey had done the same thing, only at a much younger age. And it was very tough for my dad.
He was devastated when he separated from Kit. He did everything in his power to make that work. And also he was so surprised. He didn't know that there was even a problem in the marriage because he was so focused into his sports. And he loved Kit a lot. I know that. And so when that marriage broke up, he was devastated. It took him a long time to get over it, a really long time. He was not the type of guy that dated easily. He was pretty serious, and I think it took a while before he was able to just even think about going out with someone else. And I think not until he met Fran, and I don't even know that he met her, he just saw her, and he just fell instantly in love with her. And I remember him calling us up and saying, I want you to see something. And he came over with a video of the race that was in San Diego. And then he said, stop. And he said, see that blonde over there? And we said, yeah. He said, I'm going to marry her. I said, does she know about it? He said, no, but I'm going to marry her. I was living in Pacific Beach, California, and I was a member of the Pacific Beach Town Council and the Pacific Beach Junior Women's Club. And a lady came to the club and said, we have an opportunity for the club to earn some money. So it was from Thursday through Sunday, and I volunteered for Saturday. So I went to the what I thought was going to be a boat show, and it was an unlimited hydroplane race. And I was to keep people together, groups, as they went around and looked for pit tours. And the more I listened, I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a dangerous sport. You know, it really would be interesting to talk to a driver, and they must have a death wish. And so I was there the whole day, keeping people in groups. During the day, however, 3 different people in the sport asked me to go to dinner. One of them was Bill Muncey. And so I accepted just because I wanted to see what made a man like this tick. So he was doing Wide World of Sports for that first race, 1969, my first race. So he said, do you mind, there'll be some cameramen tonight when we go to dinner. Well, that was a little intimidating, but anyway, it was a very nice dinner, and he invited me to come to the race the next day. However, his boat was not running. It was the U.S. Equipment Company boat. It wasn't running, so he told me more about racing, and I just found him to be so interesting.
About 6 weeks later, a month later, calls us up. I'll be over in 10 minutes. Comes over. He says, okay, you're going down to meet the girl that I showed you on the film. What do you mean I'm going to go down and meet the girl? He says, I found her. She lives in Puyallup. She's visiting her parents. I said, come on, how did you find this person? He says, I have my ways. So we go down, and we were, I think, the first people to meet Fran. And so what do? Of course, we go out for ice cream, and we meet Fran, and he was just nuts about her right off.
Then he courted Fran, and she probably was overtaken by him as well because he's such a powerful guy. And I remember him just being totally, totally in love with her and with his two children and her two children. And then, and she was something herself. What a darling girl she was. She had a great sense of humor, as did Kit have a sense of humor. They both did. I guess he's into women with good sense of humor. And she was very funny. She was always good for a great joke, and she was good for Bill. She made him have his focus again where he could concentrate on his racing, his music, and the devastation of his first marriage, which, remember, to him was a failure, and he's not used to failure. So that, I think that was really important.
We had a small wedding, Port Ludlow. He found a Baptist minister who didn't have any teeth, but that was okay. The best man, Dave Seefeldt, missed the boat, missed the ferry, so he was late. So as it worked out, Bill had two best men. So after we were married, we lived on Mercer Island in Bill's home. But he loved San Diego. He'd been racing there for a number of years and loved the climate. So within 2 years, we'd moved to San Diego. When I married Bill, I had two children, and they were 5 and 3 years old. And then Bill and I had a son, Edward, named after Bill's father, Edward Leonard Muncey II. So we had 3 children in our family. He was a wonderful father to my children, and Edward became the love of his life. The thing that my children remember most about Bill is that he made every holiday so much fun. And just every special occasion, he just made everything brighter. And I suppose on an everyday basis also. Like when he would be traveling and come home, and they were just always so happy to see him because he was just like having a stick of dynamite in the house, or bright lights because how have you been doing in school, and it's so good to see you, and just made everything so much more fun, and especially the holidays.
When I was around Bill, once I had started in the Unlimiteds, I never saw members of his first family around. The kids were never around. He was very, very much focused on Edward. And I think if, in my mind, Bill goes down as being a great father. Being a boat driver is, okay, that's an okay thing to be. Being a musician is great, but Bill was a wonderful father, and it's been really a privilege for me to stay close to Edward all these years and see the person he grew up to be. And I think if Bill were alive today, that's the saddest part for me, is that he never got to see Edward as a man, and he did a great job.
I'll never forget. Well, this is when he had just remarried and was married to Fran, and Fran told him to go get some new suits and so on. And he went down to Littler's or something. He spent, I don't know, bought, in those days, $600 suits were pretty. And I remember he showed up in a turquoise blue suit and a gray suit, and I said, geez, Bill, these are the latest suits. They were all right. And of course, he ran a pretty successful campaign. He hardly had any funding at all, and he made a terrific showing in that in the primaries. And he would have been a great lieutenant governor. He would have been great in politics.
Dad, I remember, was really proud of the fact that he got the vote of confidence from the public that he did get, and that he went through the primaries and was beaten by a worthy adversary, Art Fletcher. I don't think the Fletcher prevailed. I think the lieutenant governor stayed the same. Sherberg, I think his name was. Anyway, he took a run at it and he gave it his best shot, and he didn't prevail, but boat racing seemed to pick up.
Bill was never a fashion plate. He just didn't care what clothes that he would wear, and so once I was married to him, sometimes I'd see him get ready to leave the house, and I said, you can't go out of this house looking like that, or you can't wear this, especially if it was something important like a television interview or speaking someplace. It wasn't a priority to him, fashion or how he looked. So I tried to show him what things matched, and then so did O.H. Frisbee. He would take him every year to Duro in Chicago, and it was a company that made suits, the finest materials and fabrics, and they would, Bill, I guess, would have a little input as to what the fashion was, or probably told him what he wouldn't wear, absolutely would not wear. But O.H. was a very fashion conscious, and so he helped out a lot too.